Margaret stood frozen, her usual smug confidence draining from her face as the room erupted in applause. Just moments ago, she had been issuing fines, wielding her authority like an iron fist, making sure James knew he didn't belong in her neighborhood. But now? Now she was staring at the man she had tried to ruin, the new HOA Chairman, her new boss. The color drained from her face as James stepped forward, a knowing smile on his lips. Looks like we'll be making some changes around here. But what happened next? Even Margaret wasn't prepared for that. Let's start from the beginning. James Carter had been living in his new home for just under a month when the first fine arrived in the mail. A crisp, white envelope, the HOA's logo stamped at the top in bold blue letters, and inside, an infraction notice stating that his lawn was not properly maintained. The kicker? His lawn was immaculate, freshly cut, edged perfectly with neatly trimmed hedges. He sighed, shaking his head as he walked back inside. His neighborhood, Oak Ridge Hills, was supposed to be a place of prestige. At least, that's how the HOA president, Margaret Whitmore, described it. Margaret was a middle-aged white woman, notorious for being overly strict and passive-aggressively condescending. She loved her authority, wielding it like a sword over the homeowners, particularly those who didn't fit in with her ideal of the neighborhood. James, a successful corporate executive, had heard about the HOA horror stories before moving in, but he never thought he'd become a target. Then came the second fine, this time for having an unauthorized fence. A fence that had already been there when he bought the house. And the third fine? His trash cans were left out too long, even though he had brought them in before sundown. James frowned as he looked through the notices piling up on his counter. This wasn't about HOA rules. This was personal. One afternoon, James was tending to his front yard when Margaret marched up his driveway, clipboard in hand, flanked by two other HOA members. "Mr. Carter," she greeted, forcing a smile. "I hope you've read the notices we've sent." James wiped the sweat off his forehead and nodded. "I have, and they don't make any sense." Margaret's smile never faltered. "Well, Oak Ridge Hills maintains a certain standard, and we expect all homeowners to uphold it." Her eyes scanned James up and down. "We're very particular about who fits in here." There it was, the coded language, the unspoken message. James took a slow breath, keeping his composure. "Margaret, I think we both know these fines are baseless." She tilted her head, feigning confusion. "Oh, James, may I call you James? You see, it's not personal. It's about maintaining order, and as HOA president, it's my duty to enforce our regulations." James clenched his jaw. "Oh, it's personal, all right." She handed him another bright pink notice and turned on her heel. "We'll expect payment within the next 5 business days." James stared at the fine, $500 for improper mailbox placement. His mailbox was the exact same as his neighbor's. This wasn't going to stop. But James wasn't just any homeowner, and Margaret had no idea who she was messing with. James had dealt with power-hungry corporate executives his entire career. People like Margaret? They operated off the assumption that no one would challenge them. So, he did what he did best. He dug into the HOA's records. What he found? Corruption, favoritism, and thousands of dollars in mismanaged funds. Margaret had been using HOA fees to fund personal vacations, approve fines only against minority homeowners, and manipulate board elections to keep herself in power. She was running the HOA like a dictatorship. That's when James made his move. At the next HOA board meeting, he walked in not as a homeowner, but as a candidate. Because what Margaret didn't know was that James had been quietly gathering signatures from homeowners who were sick of her leadership. And now, He was running for HOA Chairman. The room fell silent when Margaret saw him step up to the podium. "What is he doing here?" she whispered to one of the board members. James cleared his throat. "I'd like to formally announce my candidacy for HOA Chairman." Gasps rippled through the audience. Margaret's face drained of color. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Margaret laughed nervously. "Oh, James, that's adorable. But I don't think you're qualified for this position." James leaned in, voice steady. "Margaret, I have a law degree from Yale. I've managed billion-dollar firms, and I know a thing or two about accountability." Her face twisted in panic, because she knew. She knew if James won, she'd lose everything. The day of the HOA election was a spectacle. Homeowners turned out in record numbers, eager for change. Margaret scrambled to keep control. She tried smearing James, spreading rumors that he was going to raise HOA fees or let the neighborhood go downhill. But the homeowners had seen enough. When the votes were counted, it wasn't even close. James won by a landslide. Margaret stood there, stunned, as the reality sank in. She was out. And worse, James was now her boss. As he stepped up to take his position as the new HOA chairman, he turned to Margaret, whose face was burning with humiliation and disbelief. "Margaret," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I'm implementing a new policy. Fair treatment for all homeowners. No more discrimination, no more abuse of power." Margaret scoffed, trying to regain control. "You won't last a month." James simply smiled. "We'll see about that." The room erupted in applause. Margaret stormed out, her reign finally over. And James, he had done what no one thought possible, taken down a tyrant and restored justice.